Well, crash and burn. That was pretty exciting last night, don't you think? Oh, yes. I mean, Donald Trump was terrific. But all eyes were on Biden. All he had to do is sound like a person who had his wits, but he didn't. He had his nitwits. It was embarrassing. I'm just being honest. He looks like death worn over. And they had him loaded up with all kinds of information, and he's rambling on, and nobody knew what the hell he was talking about. I want to warn you about a couple of things, America. The Democrat Party and their media never give up. Whether they stick with him or not, they're going to plot, they're going to connive, no matter what. If that means sticking with Biden, they'll stick with Biden. Means they're going to dig even harder on Trump and attack him even harder. Look for every opportunity. These people are evil. These people are diabolical. For years, they have sought to cover up Biden's mental frailties. For years. As they got worse and worse and worse, their attacks on people who happen to notice it became more severe. More severe. They lie about audio and video. It's all right-wing plan. But last night, the whole world saw it, including people who don't normally pay attention to politics. 47.5 million people in America watched. And I'm sure many of them couldn't believe what they saw. That's the truth. Donald Trump was disciplined. He never flailed around. I think he's figured out how to do this. And he's doing it superbly. Things that were said about him by Biden, many of which were very nasty. Very nasty. But he kept his cool. I actually thought his closing statement was fabulous. His closing statement was fabulous. So let's break this down a little bit. Really, the only way for the Democrats to prevent Joe Biden from getting nominated is if Joe Biden agrees not to be nominated. There are other ways. They're very tricky. They're very difficult. But you have to keep in mind, 99% of the delegates at the convention were elected or appointed in support of Biden. He controls these delegates. So, that's number one. Number two, this is a big issue to me. And I'll talk about it this week and on Life, Liberty, and Levin, Saturday and Sunday. What the Democrat Party and their media have done, bringing the Democrat Party to the brink like this, is they're about to, should they try and swap out Biden, disenfranchise tens of millions of people who voted in the Democrat primary. Tens of millions of people who voted. Tens of thousands of activists. Tens of thousands of donors. To what end? And a relative small circle of individuals working behind the scenes will kneecap Biden, effectively warning him, and trying to replace him with somebody else. And with whom should they replace him? Kamala Harris is going to go quietly, and she plays up the race and the gender issue, which she clearly will do no matter what. Gavin Newsom's been traveling from one end of the country lying through his whitened teeth about Joe Biden's state, telling us and anybody who would listen that Joe Biden is smart, he's sharp, he's talked to him many times. So Gavin Newsom is one of the liars who has sought desperately to deceive the American people. The governor of Michigan, what a mess. What a mess. So even if Biden stays in, we cannot let our guard down. These people are capable of anything. Even though he had a completely disastrous night. What do you think Jack Smith is thinking right now? What do you think Judge Merchan is thinking right now? What do you think the appellate left-wing Democrats on the courts in New York are thinking right now? They're thinking now more than ever, they got to put the legal squeeze on Trump. And I'll get to the legal issues in a moment. These are evil people. They will do anything. I mean, look at the Attorney General of the United States. He goes to the White House with a phony, a fictional privilege claim, has Biden sign it, issues it, does Biden, about keeping the audio from the Biden interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur secret from Congress, even though he doesn't have a leg to stand on, even though they released the text, even though that was altered, even though they have absolutely no constitutional or legal basis for doing it. He figures, go ahead and sue me. You won't catch me by the time the election is here. They'll do anything. Okay, look at this case involving obstruction. Those of you who listen to this program or watch me on Levin TV or watch me on Fox, we've been on top of this longer and earlier before anybody. It's what I call the Enron Obstruction Act. Sarbanes-Oxley of 2002. Now, this law was passed because after the Enron debacle, they found out that Enron destroyed reams and reams of information, knowing full well, even though they hadn't had a subpoena or even a letter, that Congress would want to investigate their collapse. So Congress passed a law. The law is very specific. If you destroy records or change records, that sort of thing, that's a criminal obstruction. So what did Jack Smith do? What does Jack Smith always does? He takes the law, he rewrites it, takes the facts, and forces them into the law. Like a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole. 1512, the statute, has absolutely nothing to do, nothing, with what took place on January 6th. It's an obstruction statute, but it's not an obstruction statute the way the Department of Justice applied it, the U.S. Attorney, against all these protesters on January 6th. And it's not an obstruction statute the way Jack Smith applied it to President Trump. Jack Smith brought 4 charges against President Trump, 2 of which were based on this false interpretation, this rewrite of this obstruction Enron statute, both of which now have been thrown out. He's got 2 left. One of them is what I call the federal contractor criminal statute. And the other one is the 1871 Klan Act. That's a civil rights act when the Klan was trying to prevent and was preventing black people from voting or involved in political activism. That has nothing to do with January 6th. Donald Trump was not involved in preventing people from voting. The federal contractor fraud, he goes on for 30 pages or so, does Smith, laying out, well, here's what he did in Michigan, and here's what he did in Arizona, and here's what he did in Georgia, and don't forget the fake electors. It has nothing to do with that statute. Nothing. And yet they call it insurrection. We actually have an insurrection statute, a federal criminal statute. Donald Trump is not charged with that. We actually have a sedition statute, both actual sedition and conspiracy to commit sedition. Donald Trump's not charged with that either, because there's not a syllable of evidence that he was involved in an insurrection or sedition, or they would have thrown it at him. So this prosecutor went looking. And he went to the bottom of the barrel, dusted off these statutes, and said, all right, I'll mold it into this. The same guy, in an 8-0 opinion where one justice recused himself, destroying the governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. How he changed that statute, like he's changed the obstruction statute. Now, Monday, we'll have the immunity issue. I will be here on radio, obviously, to discuss it. It'll be after Life, Liberty, and Levin, so obviously we can't discuss it there. But I want to remind you of something. This is very important. Excuse me, I think I have COVID, as a matter of fact, but I'm going to muscle through here. I want to remind you of something. When President Trump's lawyers raised the issue of immunity, I don't think there was a legal analyst in America who said it was a legitimate defense. Except me. I didn't go as far as President Trump's lawyers, but I said there is an absolute, legitimate argument on immunity. Absolute, legitimate argument on immunity. That said, I also pointed out that what we have here is this prosecutor, Jack Smith, who has criminalized the election process. Things that are supposed to be resolved by Congress, that counts the electors and makes these decisions and handles disputes, he criminalized. Contacting secretaries of state, urging a second set of electors and so forth. This is normal stuff. He's criminalized it. So on top of everything else, the charge itself, in my view, is substantively illegitimate. It opens up a Pandora's box for the courts in the future, and candidates and activists don't have the foggiest idea what they can and cannot do, given the enormous ambiguity and leeway handed to now federal prosecutors and state prosecutors. So this immunity issue is a big deal. We'll see what they do on Monday. But the legal analysts, oh, that's a slam dunk case. No, it's not. They also told you that the documents case is a slam dunk case. Bill Barr was all over TV. Look, this is black and white. You don't screw with the Department of Justice when they're asking you for it. You turn it. Excuse me. It is hard for me to believe these people have ever been involved in litigation. It really is. You have motions that you file. And we went through the motions. The motions on the attorney-client privilege decision in district court in Washington, D.C. It turns out on Thursday, Judge Aileen Cannon said, I want to hear the arguments on this because, keep in mind, the judge who ruled that there was a crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege was a former Leahy staffer appointed by Obama, senior status now, who basically held a secret hearing. Secret. Well, Judge Cannon has to deal with the trial because the case against Trump on documents was brought in the wrong jurisdiction. Washington. It should have been brought in Florida, where Mar-a-Lago is. So Smith quickly moves the case down to Florida. He got his indictment in D.C. and a rubber stamp in Florida. And this judge says, well, you know what? I need to look at this. I got to resolve these motions before there's an actual trial. And so she wants to hear the arguments on this. Issues on the gag order. There's no order, but Smith is demanding an extremely broad gag order on Trump in the middle of an election. And more. The constitutionality of Smith's appointment. So significant that two former attorneys general, including my former boss, Ed Meese, have filed friend of the court briefs, as has Landmark Legal Foundation. They're very legitimate issues. So it's not a slam dunk, the documents case, for additional reasons, too, that I don't need to get into.